Okay, good morning everyone. This talk is about Building Man Festival. We're going to do a quick sort of introductory talk, background of where the idea came from and how we got to where we are now. And then we're going to reorganise the chairs and sit in a circle and discuss it more workshop styling, get everyone's input. A few people who are here actually came to the Building Man Festival we had in May in Herefordshire. So I'm Joseph Davis Coates. This is Marcus Letts, who's the main organiser of Cloud Cuckoo Land. And we've sort of come together through Building Man. So I just sort of tell this perspective from. So yeah, about 8 years ago, I think it was, I had this idea for Building Man Festival, which is basically quite obviously inspired by Burning Man Festival. The idea was, rather than build temporary cities in deserts, amazing as that is, and how much they achieve is quite incredible, what if we could harness that same energy and self-organising power and creativity that creates temporary cities in deserts to build instead permanent eco-villages in more sensible places. That was kind of the very brief idea. I wrote on a blog, a Creative Forum blog post, back in September 2005 or something. I wrote like a 2-line blog post saying pretty much exactly what I just said now. Then a few years later I elaborated it to a bit more of what if you took Off Grid and Sunrise and Small World and took all your favourite bit of those, and rather than, all this energy goes into building these festival sites every year, what if you just built them and left them there, and then, which is kind of the same idea. And then Marcus and Joe, who's sadly not here, guess he's resting, they met as, they're working as charity fundraisers, right? Doing like charity mugging, signing people up to direct debits, give money to charity every month on the streets, as most people in London or any other city probably would have seen. And they thought, rather than, there must be a more fun, adventurous, exciting way to raise money for good causes. So they thought, let's cycle to Cape Town, like you do. So they decided to do Camden Town to Cape Town, mostly for the alliteration, I think. Yeah. And they also, instead of just going straight down through Spain and Morocco, they thought, well, it'd be much more interesting to go through the Middle East and all that sort of stuff. So they were going that route. And they got as far as Istanbul, is that right?
A bit further.
Well, a bit further. They got to Turkey.
Couldn't go to Syria.
And yeah, the whole Syria war stuff had already kicked off, so they couldn't really carry on. But in an internet cafe in Istanbul, I think I'm saying this right, they came across my little blog post about Building Man Festival, because they were already doing Cloud Cuckoo Land, and had invested in some of the infrastructure on this site from the profits that it had made in previous years. They thought, this is the sort of direction we're going in already, and what a great idea, and what a good name, nice play on Burning Man. So when they got back from their mega trip, so they stopped and sort of turned back and spent a few months in Greece, I think, and went around the Mediterranean, had an awesome time visiting cool projects. Didn't quite make it to Cape Town. But when they got back, they phoned me up and said, hey, we discovered your idea and we thought it was really awesome, and can we run with it and do it? And I was like, well, if you do it, then I don't have to. Brilliant. So they did run with it, and the very first Building Man Festival in the UK happened this year in May, at a place called Bodenham Manor in Herefordshire. And now we're here. Well, I guess there's more of the story in that they also, before going off to do the Cape Town ride, they thought, well, actually, neither of us have done a long bike ride before. So perhaps before heading straight off to South Africa, maybe we should just do the Land's End to John O'Groats in the UK first and see if we actually like long-distance bike rides. So they organised an end-to-end, as they're known, 2 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
That went really well, and they went to loads of cool projects, and then they set off and then they organised another Break the Cycle end-to-end fundraising cycle trip this year to raise money for Building Man Festival. And I'd always wanted to do such a sort of a similar kind of bike ride, visiting cool eco projects around the country. And so obviously I had to go on the bike trip because it was doing the sort of tour I'd always wanted to do, raising money for the idea I'd had back in the day. But well, I've obviously got to go on this. And then in the process, I got to know Marcus better, and Joe and Chris and Emily and loads of other people. And I had sort of gone on about the wonders of a particular set of model rules for cooperatives that I really like, which are known as the Somerset rules for multi-stakeholder cooperatives. And I evangelised them to Marcus and Joe and everyone, saying these are totally awesome because unlike most co-ops that are just worker co-ops or consumer co-ops or enterprise co-ops, multi-stakeholder co-ops, you can define all your different stakeholder groups and empower them all and give them all this real say and a real part of ownership. So you can involve your investors or your wider community. Or so there was a kind of plan to turn Cloudberry Land into a multi-stakeholder co-op, Break the Cycle into a multi-stakeholder co-op, Building Man into a multi-stakeholder co-op, Upcycle into a multi-stakeholder co-op, Permanent Cultures into a multi-stakeholder co-op, and on and on and on. And it occurred to me one day, hang on a minute, why don't we just start with one? And all of these cool projects that already exist can become projects of that one thing, and then at some point maybe they'll scale and spin off as their own co-ops. But rather than having 6 sets of accounts to do every year from day one, let's start off with one set. So that's kind of where we're at. That's my sort of perspective on the story. Do you want to add anything, Marcus?
Yeah, cheers, Joseph. I was up quite late last night, so I'm a bit croaky. I just wanted to, there's a couple of things that were really significant for me in the process of organising and experiencing Building Man. And one we've already touched on is the formation of this potential United Diversity Cooperative, and just how that might look. I think there's a huge potential in these multi-stakeholder cooperatives anyway, and the ambition and vision within United Diversity is really, really exciting. So actually we're going to talk about that a bit more after this, so I don't want to get too carried away, but that's been really huge, a huge part of the experience, and it feels really, it's been quite synchronistic the way things have flowed into each other. In fact, Building Man was an incredible event for that. All the right people seemed to come almost, out of nowhere at times, with just the right skill sets. There was an incredible balance on the site, even there was only about 30 of us most of the time during the month up in Bodnam. And we were kind of billing it as being an idea whose time has come, weren't we? I think that really did ring true. There were a lot of people who really resonated with the idea. Very simple, but really effective as well. It's just to use all of this potential. Festivals are really open spaces anyway, where people, can come and be really creative. Like almost celebrations of sort of creative renewal every year, slightly different, but the same kind of ceremony taking place, just basically the same kind of shared experience of something really ecstatic, and it's a celebration, something really beautiful. But that potential is when you look out across a festival site, especially somewhere like Off Grid, which they hold here, and it's been a big inspiration for us as well. The skills on the site, the experience, the collective potential is vast. And if we're in a period and a process of transformation, I think there's a lot of potential in the festival model and its evolution. What can be done with these existing networks of people, maybe augmented, here and there with more experience, more knowledge. I mean, this is the other one of the other major experiences of Building Man was just how little experience we had with that kind of process. We thought, this is going to be quite, we'll just bring a load of people together and build some stuff. We actually don't have any experience of that. We've got very little experience of festival organisation, or anything really. Since the beginning, we've been organising things in a really, just quite, we'll have an idea and kind of get hyped up about it, and then just start doing it without huge amounts of kind of back-end support. The projects have all been really gift-led, so they rely really heavily on volunteers, and it makes them quite vulnerable at times to becoming overstretched. Yeah, it's been a kind of an experience organising Cloud Cuckoo Land as well, but with Building Man in particular, we were organising the bike ride to fundraise for it, and obviously organising this festival as well, and we really didn't have a huge amount of time to put into the process of like bringing this community together and really planning if we were going to do one again, and this is one of the things I want to talk about in the discussion, it would require really a huge amount more planning, I think, and just communication in the build-up and kind of collective, shaping of what it is that we want to do and why. But in this instance, we found a site which was a beautiful site with a really interesting story behind it. I'll come on to that. And it didn't require a huge amount of resources to get us there, provide a cooking space, a living space. We could go there, and with our tiny little, we fundraised about £10,000 from this bike ride, which to rebuild a school, which was the original ambition, that was bold, really. But because we were at Bodenham and we didn't have to pay for, some of the tents and the infrastructure here, just the basic infrastructure you need to keep a temporary community of 30 or 40 people going for a month. That sort of made it all possible. It's a big part of choosing that site. But yeah, my point is that it was, we didn't really have a huge number of resources to put into the project, so we decided to make it really self-organised. And it felt right to do that anyway. It just felt like that was the way this project should look. And that was a huge part of the experience of Bodenham. There was something really chaotic about it at times. But it was a really live, emergent, co-creative, fully participatory experience where we came onto the site and started asking questions and talking to each other and looking at the site again after being there, a couple of times and drawing up this plan and realising that wasn't an appropriate thing to do at all on this site, but that the potential was huge and that this amazing community of people had come together around the idea, but that really we needed to go much deeper into this process. And the most significant thing that happened at Bodenham Manor for me was that. It was the way this community came together through being really open, just being really open and really frank with each other and really present in the process and in the experience, and feeling that it was okay to make mistakes. That was fine. And it was okay to not be as organised as we should be. That was okay. We would just sort of hold hands together and try and trust each other and start to cooperate. And for me, that is the most kind of fundamental thing, that these spaces that we can build and then hold and then be in together give us that opportunity to kind of look each other in the eye and say, well, hang on a minute, maybe we could cooperate with each other rather than compete, and maybe we can trust each other and begin to love each other and just work more closely together. And I think if you recognise your radical interconnectedness, if you recognise that, then that all becomes quite self-evident, that things will flow better if there's a real openness between us, if we communicate effectively, and if we're not afraid to make mistakes. That is kind of why the theme here this weekend is the hero's journey, because it just recognises that crisis, that chaos, is the most creative, fertile soil, really, for every transformation, every emergent idea or new concept, or it's all part of that process. And if we're able to hold those spaces and feel comfortable together in that chaos, I think that's probably the most important thing we can learn to do with each other, just because that would be relevant in so many situations. So apart from the actual Building Man project and its essential nature, which is building community infrastructures, the actual process of Building Man, the culture that is emerging, is one that's really participatory and co-creative, radically open, but not, and we'll come on to all of this during the day, but not necessarily in a really sort of flat consensus-based way, recognizing again that there are hierarchies in nature, but in fact they're more like holochies. You know, they're holes within other holes. Always, it's a fractal universe.
Jump back to Bodnum.
Should we jump back? Yeah, do you want to talk a bit about that?
So yeah, just to sort of jump back to what actually happened at Bodnum Manor and where we are now, what the sort of some of the key questions we're asking ourselves and want your feedback on. So before Bodnum happened, I had expressed a few reservations about, oh, this is privately owned land, because even though I hadn't spelled it out, when I said let's build eco-villages in sensible places, by sensible places I kind of meant on land that's collectively or cooperatively owned in some way. So that when we turn up with loads of people and build a new school or dig a new wet system or whatever it is, that isn't just investing in some private landowners' additional private wealth. Even though the process of doing that still could be transformative for the people that do it and all this sort of stuff, like it was. And we did achieve quite a lot at Bodnum, and it was a wonderful experience for everyone who came along. But then shortly after we left, all sorts of sort of weird social dynamics that have existed on the site for ages kind of erupted, because everyone kind of kept them under wraps while we were there and behaved really well. Stuff kind of happened after we left, and most of the people we were directly engaging with have now sort of got plans to leave the site, and they're like, oh, shall we dig up the plants we planted and stuff? And we're like, well, maybe we'll take the drills we bought, but that's going a bit far, I think. And then we were going to have like a reunion there a few weeks ago, but that got cancelled because of everything that was happening. And I'd already brought my train tickets, so I got a bit pissed off about that. So that was kind of the trigger for me to try and sort of go, no, this is all wrong, we need to do it properly, like we kind of know. So there's a really nice online collaborative decision-making system, which is still in closed beta, but called Lumio, where you can sort of have discussions and make proposals and agree or disagree or abstain or block or whatever. So I managed to get us an account on there. And I made a proposal that perhaps Building Man should only happen on collectively owned or cooperatively owned land or whatever, or land that's held isn't just privately owned. It's probably an easier way of saying it. And there's been a discussion over the last month online, which not everyone's engaged as much as they can, especially some of the core people who've organised this, because they've been busy organising this. And at first there was sort of broad agreement with that proposal, and then few counterbalance arguments were made, and the end of the vote, after this arbitrary period of time that I set to engage, we tried to engage as many people as possible in the discussion. So every single person that donated to the crowdfunding campaign, every person that came to Building Man, every person who registered to be a volunteer, even if they didn't even make it, just by expressing that engagement, and everyone who came on the bike ride that raised the money for it, were all invited to come and have their say on this, key sort of topic of where are we going to invest our energies. And the sort of result of that particular proposal, it didn't succeed. It got one person blocked it, so that can't go ahead. But 50% of the people that did vote did agree with the proposal, and one person abstained, one person blocked, and the rest kind of disagreed. Most of the people that disagreed, this is my sort of summary of it, I guess. Most of them agreed that that should be our core focus, but that making it a strict rule was perhaps too restricting and wasn't ideal, and that maybe we could have a less strict rule that if a particular opportunity arose that we did want to take hold of. So it seems to be Lucy, who isn't here, she was at Building Man Festival. She posted a comment about saying perhaps we could engage with privately owned projects again, but under certain specific conditions, like the landowner themselves engage with our decision-making processes and come to our shared meals and get involved in the work that we do on their site, so they're equally invested in what we're creating there as well. So that's a sort of potential alternative proposal that I think would gain more sort of agreement within the wider community to go forward. But then there's sort of counter arguments to that, and so I've got some land in Spain, for example, and I'd love a building ban to happen on the land in Spain. And if it was agreed that we only do it on collectively owned land, then that would be a really good incentive for me to get off my arse and do what I've always intended to do and put that land into collective ownership. And then we'd be moving towards the world we want to live in a bit more, in that I think one of the key problems with the world we find ourselves in is that land is owned by a tiny minority of the population, and for food, energy, housing, for everything that sustains us, you need access to land. So I quite strongly feel that we can't have the peaceful, just, sustainable world, the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, as Charles Eisenstein says, whilst land is still privately owned by a tiny minority. So it'd be quite nice to have that incentive. But yeah, that's sort of something we want to explore with all you guys, and where are you at with it? Want to add anything to that?
Just another thing I think is quite interesting and quite important is how we fund these kind of projects. Because at the moment they've been really gift-led in that we've crowd-funded a budget to use, but that's taken huge amounts of volunteer time. And then we've organised it as volunteers, and it's been a complete gift economy on site where everyone's chipped in a bit for their meals, but otherwise it's free, anyone can come and be involved. But you have to want to be there. No one's getting paid at all, which kind of works. But
so one of the most skilled people that came along to Building Man this time was a bit like, hang on a minute, why would I invest all my time and energy on this privately owned site? I'll do it for £200 a day quite happily. I'll professionally run some workshops and stuff like that. So the issue of ownership reared its head during the thing as well. We kind of, most of the sort of, there are lots of similar things that have happened around the world to the idea of Building Man. In some ways kind of the normal model, they just did it at Embercombe down the road recently, is you fundraise enough money to be able to pay some professional people that can lead it, who have got the practical skills, and then people pay to come on courses with those people, and in the process of the course then they build the new building or something. And maybe that's the sort of thing we need to explore going forward, or
and one of the questions that was raised was whether we required a resource base ourselves on which to work. So perhaps Building Man should look to grow and gain experience through a longer term process, the acquisition, development of a site, which would also allow this project to it might be quite difficult to raise large amounts of money through crowdfunding. Well, it depends how you do it, but if you're making community share issues, you kind of need to protect that investment in some sense. And if Building Man is effectively just giving all that energy, always just giving that energy to any particular project we work with, it might be more sensible to have a site, first of all, which can be a kind of a vehicle for continuing investment, reinvestment, by generating a resource base, some income, which we've never really had before in any of the projects we've run. And it's getting to a point now where that might not be possible to sustain for much longer, just a completely gift-led economy, because we haven't got anything really to clothe ourselves, to pay the basic things. We're running really, really low on ideas and inspiration in terms of that particular dynamic.
That sort of leads into the question as well, so on the online thing of, did we agree that we should only do it with this on collectively owned land or whatever, I sort of originally agreed with my own proposal, funnily enough, and then I disagreed with it for a while, because I thought, actually, I think a better proposal is emerging, which is quite common when you have these nice collaborative processes. The wisdom of the crowd comes through, and maybe a better proposal is possible. But I ended up agreeing with it again, even though lots of people saying it's too restrictive, that restricts us from doing stuff. I think that what is really restricting us is private land ownership. That's why it's so hard to house and clothe and feed ourselves is because we can't get affordable access to land. If you do have access to land, it's not actually that hard to sort those sorts of things out. Private land ownership, and the banking system are why housing is so expensive, which is where the bulk of most people's income goes on paying their rent or their mortgage. And if you didn't have so much private land ownership, and if you didn't have mortgages, which are compound interest-bearing debt lent into existence by privately owned banks, housing could be an awful lot more affordable. And then we could have this safe space to work from and move forward. Someone needs to replace Ian on the bicycle. It's a shame Jackson isn't here, because there's a guy who was just in here a minute ago who helped start various self-build projects in Bristol. Anyway, are there any questions before we sort of get in a circle and... Good question. There actually are quite a few. There's a growing... So one of the sort of... What's the alternative model to private land ownership? One I've found that I think is sort of has the most potential is what is known as community land trusts. And there is a growing community land trust movement in the UK. And if you go to, I think it's communitylandtrust.org.uk, they've got a map, a Google map of, I think there's over 100 in the process of emerging, and they've got different coloured pins for ones that already exist and ones that are in the process of forming, and some have already got land, some have already built houses. There's actually a fund which we should go into, which you can get paid to go and visit community land trusts. There's this whole seeing is believing fund. There's one in London now as well, in East London, which is one of the first big urban community land trusts. And I recently discovered, if you go to the Building Man page on Facebook, there was a recent big bit of research done by a couple of community connected farms about access to land for community connected farming. And as part of that research, they've mapped some of the many places. They were mostly in the rest of Europe, but they've got another Google map with collectively owned, community-connected farms all over Europe, which would conceivably be potentially awesome sites. Maybe there are quite a few that it would be possible to shine the light on. There's the Emergent Eco Village Network, and there are. There's not loads and loads of them, but there's dozens. Any more questions before we sort of circleify ourselves and discuss all together a bit more?
I was just going to add on to that last question. It's not just that. There are loads of different models and processes that are already being used, have already been experimented with, and shown to be viable. With Building Man, we had this original idea of what we were going to do, but the whole thing was transformed through the experience. And we ended up with a plan to transfer part of this privately owned land into community ownership. So our vision was that he was going to give us this small pocket of land on his bigger site, which would then be the engine to regenerate the whole site, because it's in serious disrepair up at Bodenham. And so we were going to form a community land trust, which would have involved the local community in Bodenham, and the people on the site. And he could have been named trustee himself, so could other people who lived on the site at Bodenham. And then you would be able to include as well a wider community of interest, so anybody who wanted to participate in this process for whatever reason, and that might include us as Building Man. And then once you're at that stage, you can make community share issues, and it would probably worked as part of United Diversity actually, but then we might have scaled up whatever was happening there to form its own cooperative. The structures exist.
We have actually drafted a proposal to the, very short, succinct proposal to the landowners at Bodenham, saying, why don't you transfer the title of that small bit of land that the school's on, where we did the bulk of our work, to a community land trust. And the sort of, based on my research, the best practice model of community land trusts, they generally have a tripartite board, so you have a third of the board elected by the people that live and work on the land that's held in trust, a third elected by the surrounding local community, and a third elected by any other stakeholders, so the wider community of interest, or it might be the local council might get involved, or whatever. Sadly, none of the model rule, if you go to Community Land Trust network site for the UK, none of their model rules that do that. They don't have that structure. And there is another, there are a set of rules that do that, but then they don't allow community share issues. So I have been working with Wessex Community Assets, who have been helping people set up community land trusts for quite a long time now, to adopt their rules to do what we want to do with them. We've kind of done that, so we are going to send this proposal, I believe, to the owners of Bondland Trust, and maybe they will go for it. It'd be totally awesome if they did. Yeah. Shall we? Yeah. Anyone at the time? 5 to 12. Okay.
Okay.
We're really ready for the next talk, which is.
Maybe we could just have like 5-10 minutes to go and get a coffee, or do whatever you want to do. But the next talk is about United Diversity, and that's this multi-stakeholder cooperative, which we hope will integrate a whole load of projects, including Building Man, including Cloud Cuckoo Land, including various other Break the Cycle and the Beggars Banquet and Permanent Cultures. So we want to tell you a bit about that and some of the structures that might be adopted, most of which are going to be discussed later in the day. We've got a series of expert speakers talking about all of these issues, including the history of the commons and the cooperative movement, and circular economics, and just various other aspects of what the vision behind United Diversity. What's really, really important to grasp is that this is a really open process, and it's about building a membership. Because it's multi-stakeholder, you can have members who are incredibly diverse. You might only come to the festival, but you can still be a member, and you still have an interest in the project. And so why shouldn't you have access to the AGM and be able to feed in an appropriate way? That's kind of the tagline is together we have everything. It's pretty simple. But I think it's quite profound as well. So maybe we have a short break and we reorganise and then we can sort of introduce that and then discuss it, and maybe people who are interested can become involved and contribute in an infinite variety of ways.
I was going to take people to see the wet system at midday.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to go, then I'm going to go.
Okay, cool. You want to do that from now? Set off now?
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking of it.
Yeah, great. No, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
So the Fernhill's got this amazing wet system. All the toilet blocks are plumbed into the wet system. So they're flushing toilets, but that waste is just literally moved around. I think there's a pump on this site because there's no. On most sites you could just do it with gravity. But I think there's a pump on this site that's very flat. But that feeds into this reed bed system, which we're all camping around. And there's a series of lakes there, a series of reed beds. I think there's 5 pools. Yeah.
Basis. So it goes in the top pool, and we plant about 40 different species of plants. The top pond, we have the real sort of sluggish plants that I'll do from it. There's really sluggish plants that like waste, and they have basically their roots have a relationship with the bacteria in the soil. That means that the bacteria transforms the waste nutrients into nutrients accessible for the plants. So they gradually clean the water, and it filters through the soil and the ditches down through the ponds. So the bottom one is bathing water quality, and it's a wildlife habitat. It's all planted up with wildlife plants. So if anybody wants to come and see it,
She's going to take you and show you that now, if you'd like. They're really amazing because they're scalable, aren't they? I mean, they can support whatever size community.
I've planted ones in people's back gardens with ponds that are literally like that big, and then we've just done a really big one at Hereford Livestock Market for all the waste that's created from that. So
parking in someone's back garden, you're saying that you can do it so that their toilets flush into it. That is cool.
Yeah. And it can also be used for processing waste from cider and dairy farms, kennels, pig units, you know, so that...
Western have got one of the big ones, haven't they? Western cider. I think Western have a...
That's right, yeah. It was one of the first ones that was done at Weston's. Yeah, it's quite well established there. Yeah.
Cool, so you want to start that now, we'll have a bit of a break in here, and then we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. Tell you a bit more about United University. Thanks very much, everybody.